All right, welcome everyone. My name is Joos Siegel. I'm the Chief Curator of the Winter Museum and welcome you to what promises to be an exceptionally interesting and intriguing program. When people hear first about the Winter Museum and its focus on Cold War history, they sometimes assume that we are a kind of visual or material illustration of the grand narratives of the Cold War. The rise and fall of the Soviet Union, the epic battle between communism and capitalism, the process that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall, etc. But those grand narratives actually mean very little if they are not substantiated by personal stories. These personal stories give meaning and content to historical narratives, but they also show the complexities and ambiguities sometimes of history. And I think that is what today's program makes very special, that we get to hear these personal voices, artistic voices, that throw a very particular light on the structures of history, if you will. I want to briefly mention that our current exhibitions very much align with that focus. We have Enrique Martinez Celaya's art installation in the main exhibition space that combines his personal memories with the background of Cuban Cold War history. We have in the West Gallery our exhibition of architecture in Ghana from the 1960s, which was the result of two very individualistic architects who worked based on an exchange program, an ideological exchange program between Hungary and Ghana, but they couldn't care less about the ideological underpinnings and pressed their own ideas and their own convictions on the architectural projects they did. Also, we just installed in the south hallway of the exhibition, if you enter the museum building on your left, an exhibition from our artist in residence, Brenda Keneally, who invited people from the Senior Center in Culver City, from unhoused artists who work in Skid Row, and from professional development high school students who intern at the museum from Watts and Compton, to create scrapbooks about their lives. And also, that is, I think, a very good example of personal individual voices that are not often heard in public, that we want to present and want to be heard. So I'm very grateful to Veronika Kelemen, who organized this unique program today. I'm introducing her in a minute, but I first want to also thank Rachel, Rigdon, and our visitor engagement team, who always so seamlessly organize these kind of programs. Jessie, our fantastic AV tech, and Clara, our videographer, who actually brought us in touch with you, Veronika. So thank you, Clara, for that. And I have a little official introduction, which I'm going to read now. Veronika Kelemen is a Hungarian writer based in Los Angeles by way of London and New York. Her poetry book, As Above, So Below, was released by Choo Choo Press in 2020, and her work has been featured by Sunflower Station, Zona Motel, Midcult, the Columbia Journal, and 17 magazine. She earned her MFA in writing from Columbia University, where she received the Chair's Fellowship. She is the curator and host of the reading series Dear Diary and co-host of podcast No Matter with Lillian Feygin. And please give her a very warm applause, Veronika.
Hello. Keep it going. Hi. Let me lower this a little. That didn't work. Anyway, thank you, Joos, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you so much to all of you for being here. If I seem nervous, it's partly because I've never done an event of this scale, but actually it's mostly because my Hungarian mom is in the audience. Hi, Mom. I'd like to introduce myself in my native language, Hungarian. Kelemen Veronika vagyok, 1994-ben születtem Budapesten. My name is Veronika Kelemen. I was born in 1994 in Budapest, Hungary. My parents, my brother, and I moved to the US in 2002 when I was about to enter 3rd grade. Telling my classmates I was from Hungary usually elicited 2 responses. The first was, "What's that?" And the second was, "So are you hungry all the time?" The answer to that question is yes, but I digress. At any rate, it was clear to me from a young age that Eastern Europe had something of a PR problem. In 4th grade, my mom cooked palacinta for my class's food fair, which, if you've ever had blinchki, it's somewhat similar to that, thin and delicious crepes. At the end of the food fair, the palacinta she'd made were left largely uneaten, with the kids gravitating to the brownies and cookies instead. Later, when I was in high school, my AP European history teacher paused the clip of Schindler's List we were watching to ask me in front of the whole class, "Veronika, does your family have any stories you'd like to share?" I did not. By the time I was in college, my peers were coming around to the idea of the Eastern Bloc, having visited Budapest on their study abroad programs. They were mostly excited to tell me how shockingly cheap it was and how easy that made it for them to get drunk. Okay, so tiny countries with a lot of political unrest and cheap alcohol, got it. So here I am at 31, and the picture that's been painted of the place that I'm from is at a stark odds with what I actually know my childhood to have been like. To me, it's summers with no air conditioner, apricot fruit juice, hanging the washing in the yard, going for walks with my cousins with 0 parental supervision, and more importantly, access to a diaspora of intelligent, insightful, funny, talented, and artistic people, some of whom you'll hear speak today. I'm excited to say that 7 Eastern European countries are represented on today's lineup, and that we will be hearing from a composer, a filmmaker, a digital artist, a photographer, and of course, several writers. Being an Eastern European person has taught me things that I don't know that I could have learned in any other community. I am proud to come from a people who possess an internal strength and spirit that can never be broken. I hope that today you learn a little something about our culture that speaks to the unique and prismatic nature of our customs, our love, and our joy, more than what you might have learned at school or what you may have seen on the news. To transition to our first featured artist, I curated this show at a time where our region is, to put it lightly, once again experiencing political unrest and violence. I am inspired by every Eastern European person who chooses to create art, and in particular, those who do so in unsafe and unfair conditions. It was important to me to highlight such a story when I was curating today's show. On that note, I would like to introduce Katya Richardson, who will be presenting an excerpt from the documentary Match in a Haystack, which spotlights a dance team in Ukraine shot in 2023 and 2024. Katya Richardson is an Emmy-winning composer and pianist from Los Angeles. Currently the composer in residence at Breakwater Studios, Richardson composed the score for the 2024 Oscar-winning film The Last Repair Shop, which earned her a Critics' Choice Documentary Award nomination and an ASCAP Composer's Choice nomination for Documentary Score of the Year. Wow, was I not speaking into the microphone that whole time? Sorry. Most recently, she scored the ESPN 30 for 30 doc Motorcycle Mary, winning Best Score from the Hollywood Music and Media Awards and a David Raxon Emerging Talent Award nomination from the Society of Composers and Lyricists. In 2024, she was recognized for her work on the PBS special Keeping the Pinelands, for which she won an Emmy for Best Composition. At 13 years old, Richardson was selected for the 2-year intensive LA Phil Composer Fellowship Program and premiered her piece Undefined with the Los Angeles Philharmonic at Walt Disney Concert Hall. In 2016, she composed a new work fanfare exclusively for the Hollywood Bowl opening night Steely Dan concert conducted by Thomas Wilkins. Richardson's creative and collaborative spirit also extends to the world of modern dance. She has premiered pieces at the Royal Opera House in London and scored works for the Joffrey Ballet, Norwegian National Ballet, and German ballet that I'm going to butcher in Munich. Her most recent dance work, Vortex, is a 65-minute collaboration with esteemed British choreographer Russell Malafan OBE, which debuted at Sadler's Wells in May 2023. In May 2025, Richardson scored the Ukrainian docu-dance film Match in a Haystack, executive produced by legendary ballerina Misty Copeland. Please welcome Katya.
Hello, everyone. Let me adjust this mic to be a little higher. Thank you for the very kind introduction, Veronika. Thank you so much for organizing this event, too. We all feel so lucky to be here and to be part of this community. I will also introduce myself in my native language. Здравствуйте, меня зовут Katya. Я родилась в Anaheim в 1997 году. My name is Katya, and I was born in Anaheim in 1997. My mom is from Ukraine and moved over here in her 20s, and my father is American. I first went to Ukraine when I was 8 years old to visit my grandmother, uncle, and great-grandmother. Even at that age, I was struck by the sense of community there. In Odessa, all the neighbors knew each other by name. All the neighborhood kids knew each other. There was a sense of comfort in knowing that despite running rampant through the streets unsupervised, there was always a grandmother somewhere in one of the apartments watching you, making sure you were okay. I spent that summer hanging from trees, eating apricots, and bathing in the Black Sea. It was a summer I'll never forget. I regret to say that I haven't been back in a few years, and it pains me to think just how different things are now. I dearly cling to the memories of that endless summer, the memories of my grandmother and great-grandmother, and just how perfect it was. I am a firm believer that joy can exist even in the darkest of times. The film you're about to see is a testament to that. Match in a Haystack is a feature documentary directed by Joe Hill that I had the amazing privilege of composing the music for. It follows a female dance troupe in Kyiv as they navigate being artists in their 20s and grappling with their purpose during the war. Should they continue creating and responding to the times that they're living in, or should they be fighting on the front lines, defending their country? In the face of war, is continuing with one's daily life an act of defiance, or is it one of ignorance? In their search for answers to these questions, these young women ultimately move forward with the creation of a choreographed performance. In the documentary, dance is used as a form of interview. We see the unspoken, we see the raw, the visceral, the emotional weight of what each of them is going through. And the performance they're working towards represents hope. It represents defiance. Despite power outages and sirens, not only do these women persist, but they find camaraderie and unwavering support in one another. The clip you will see is from the last few scenes of the film. We see the dancers getting ready backstage for their final performance, many of them anxious and nervous, to the liberating moment that they step on stage and the outside world disappears, to the post-performance where emotions run high and they take a moment to celebrate and really take in this momentous achievement with one another. Working on this film and witnessing these strong women was incredibly life-affirming and inspiring. I have known many strong women in my life, my grandmother, my great-grandmother. So to see this on screen and to be able to work on a project like this really affirmed my own journey and the way I've been processing the war from afar. The humanity and passion that they have is extraordinary. These women are amazing, and the ways in which they use creation to overcome destruction is nothing short of heroic. Even in the most life-threatening of times, no one can take away the passion they share for dancing. I hope you all walk away feeling as equally moved and inspired as I did while working on it. Thank you very much.
Ідіть всі сюди. Ну, стань в коло. Ми тут з вами не сотрясати повітря, а робити духовний акт. Це не пусті слова. впустіть їх в своє серце і, фу, і згадайте, про що ми з вами розмовляли перед кожною сценою.
Зробиться. Все буде класно.
Будьте підтримкою одна одній.
Так, зробиться.
А ви прекрасні, і ви б знали, як ви виглядаєте за сценою. Правда? Все. Успіху вам. Насолодитися.
Ідіть, ідіть, ідіть.
Все.
Мені здається, мені треба було набагато більше часу за нормального життя до війни, щоб настроїтись робити виставу. Господи, я б себе стільки на це вмовляла б, казала б, ну не бійся, не бійся, не бійся. А зараз ти розумієш, ну який сенс вже боятися? Кожну хвилину може будь-що відбутися. І дуже сумно, і дуже шкода прожити отак життя, просто боючись щось, що ти сам собі придумав.
Інколи відбуваються якісь речі, які потім стають історією, яких важливість в моменті ти не відчуваєш. А буває навпаки, коли відбувається щось, ти відчуваєш, що це стає історією. І от з виставою, яку вона створила, я відчуваю так само.
Я це відчуття ніколи не забуду. Вперше мої батьки приїхали з Нікополя. Батько плакав. І сказали мені от такі слова. Дочик. Ну, насправді це дуже прості слова, але вони дуже важливі. Дочик, ми пишаємось тобою. Все, мені більше нічого не треба в житті. От чесно. Я вже готова і помирати з цими словами.
Може, є ще людина така, яка бореться. Ну, типу, тобі кажуть, ні, зараз нікому не до танця. А якщо не танцювати? А якщо ми всі перестанемо танцювати? А якщо всі перестануть писати музику? Знімати кіно? Хтось же ж це має робити?
Ти це зробила, Марка. А ти? Мовчи. Ти це зробила. Ти з себе відповідальність не знімаєш. Ти це зробила від початку і до кінця.
Ще півроку тому не могла б собі уявити, що я працюю над творчим проєктом, бо для мене таких речей не існувало. Не могло існувати в такий період часу, в таких обставинах. Цей проєкт мені нагадав, яке прекрасне це відчуття, коли я створюю. Взагалі, що створювати – це насолода. Бо я, напевно, що дала собі про це забути на довгий період.
На початку цього шляху, на початку повномасштабного вторгнення, я мала сміливість мріяти. І ніколи, звісно, що в житті я не могла б собі уявити, що, проживаючи війну, я буду одночасно з цим проживати якісь найяскравіші, найщасливіші моменти свого життя.
Така тиша тут. Я не пам'ятаю, коли я в останній раз чула таку тишу.
Thank you, Katya. The movie is really beautiful. Not a dry eye in the house, as they say. And yeah, you guys saw, but I really recommend you watch the whole thing when you have the time. I would like to introduce our next artist now. I only had to meet Martha once at a reading that I did for 10 minutes before I knew that she was the right person to have on this lineup. She's a really beautiful writer and really one to watch. I know that she's going to do really big things. Martha Wolnicki was born in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, and spent her summers with her family in Krakow. She works as a data scientist in advertising technology and resides in Brooklyn, New York. She holds degrees in neuroscience and computer programming from the University of Southern California. As she continues to develop her writing practice, she hopes to one day complete a book of personal essays exploring themes of loss, memory, language, and immigration. Please welcome Martha.
Hi, everyone. All right. I'm going to introduce myself in Polish first, and then in English. Nazywam się Marta Wolnicka, urodziłam się w roku 1995 w Pensylwanii. My name is Martha Wolnicki, and I was born in 1995 in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. Growing up, I spent all year long looking forward to our summer vacations in Poland. It was as if I had spent the whole year talking about water, and now I was finally able to swim in it. I was at last able to speak a language intelligible to others outside of the microcosm of my family home in Philadelphia. Our summer vacations officially commenced at the International Arrivals Terminal in Krakow. My family drew a lot of attention. Our Cocker Spaniel barked incessantly, the noise echoed in the terminal and drowned out all of the announcements. His crate teetered unsteadily on top of our stacked suitcases we'd spent weeks overpacking. The passenger exit was a runway flanked by hordes of families awaiting joyful reunions. I breathed a sigh of relief once I spotted the familiar faces of my aunts and uncles in the crowd. We had arrived. Summers in Poland followed a reliable rhythm. A few weeks in Krakow with my mom's family, followed by another few weeks in Piotrków with my dad's family. My mother only stayed in Poland for 2 weeks, promptly returning to Philadelphia to work and to continue cancer treatments. My father's lenient academic schedule enabled him to stay with my sister and me for the whole summer. "Can I please see your American clothes? I'll even fold them for you," begged my cousin once we arrived at my grandfather's house. The clothes I'd carelessly stuffed into my suitcase were all wrinkled, which I felt embarrassed to reveal, as if they were evidence of how spoiled America had made me. She took out each crumpled t-shirt, held it up to the light, and then proceeded to meticulously fold each item into a perfect square. I just love looking at your American clothing. I loved seeing dust collect on the framed Kodak printouts my mom had sent my grandfather of milestones he'd missed. In Poland, meals always went on for hours. At times, breakfasts became dinners. The whole family remained parked around the table. The assortments of foods changed. Time stood still, conversations meandered. The adults recounted scenes from their childhoods in Poland or engaged in lively disputes about European politics. There was nowhere else we needed or wanted to be. I spent hours in the kitchen cooking with my aunt. I learned to marinate meats, cook broths, bake cakes, and of course, make pierogies. We went to the produce market to buy from farmers with soil lodged deep underneath their fingernails, selling vegetables from their trunks of their cars. We made all varieties of preserves, plums, apples, and cherries, arranging the jars in the cellar. Foods that would be eaten at Christmas, I wouldn't be there for. I loved going into town and feeding the pigeons in the main market square. They pecked at my hands, gently pinching my skin as they ate the seeds in my palm. I extended my arms like branches, holding up 5 or 6 pigeons, their claws leaving my arms scratched. It thrilled me to be so up close to these lively, chaotic creatures. We went on long bike rides in the forest. My father navigated the twists and turns of the unmarked village roads without a map. We foraged wild blueberries that stained our lips and teeth purple. We knew the summer was coming to a close when blueberry season was over and wild mushrooms began appearing in the forest. I can't be certain which year certain scenes that felt most salient occurred. The years blend together and the memories are likely composites from many summers. I felt a rush when I found things the same way that I had left them, to see the dust collect on the same photographs on my grandfather's credenza, to feed the pigeons in the same place in the market square, or to gather wild blueberries from the same bushes in the forest. I could repeat what I remembered and have the present live alongside the past. I felt like I was always comparing the present moment to my memories, incessantly scrutinizing if anything had changed. Did the foods taste the same? Were things as fun as they were the year before? My compulsive nostalgia, my fixation on repeating the past, was an illusion I now know I needed to maintain. My home in Philadelphia just wasn't the home that I had in Poland. My relatives' boundless love, care, and joy was compressed into 2 short summer months, the memory of which I carried with me all year. Multi-hour family meals didn't happen in Philadelphia. I ate saran-wrapped, microwaved leftovers prepared by our housekeeper, alone. I watched fictional American families on Disney Channel. The hours alone spent glued to the television gave me headaches. I missed Poland when I was with my mother, but I don't remember missing my mother when I was in Poland. For the 2 months of the summer, I could forget that my mother was terminally ill. No mentions of chemotherapy, radiations, or biopsies. There was no looming tragedy in the parallel reality of summer. School never made me feel un-American. I was never plagued by a sense that I didn't belong, such that moving to Poland would be the solution. I just wasn't cared for in English like I was in Polish. I doubt that language precludes access to certain emotions. For me, English feels like it possesses a universally intelligible smoothness. The platitudes and formalities have an agreed upon politeness governing human relationships. It feels flatter, more logical, and cordial. Polish sounds harsher. The consonant clusters are difficult to pronounce. The language has a jagged and expressive patina. I find that it better evokes the visceral experience. For example, the sentence, "the cold wind stings my cheeks," in Polish translates to "przenikliwy, mroźny wiatr szczypie mnie w policzki." Byzantine rules govern the obscure grammar. Minute alterations to noun suffixes encode subject-object relationships. And a prefix can change the verb entirely, indicating continuity, completion, or excess. For example, if I say jadłam, it means I was eating. But if I say zjadłam, that means I finished eating. But if I say przejadłam się, that means I overate. Speaking Polish also enables you to have a fully private conversation in public. It's truly a privilege to say exactly the things that you should not be saying in public because nobody else at Starbucks can understand you. Divulging emotional truths is easier for me in Polish. It might just be coded in my mind that way since school and work have always been in English. But part of me thinks it's cultural. Americans are optimistic. My parents wanted the American dream. English doesn't care where you've been, but you need it to take you where you're going. It's a language obsessed with the future. But this optimism, at once intended to be liberating, can also feel moralized and coercive, as if to imply you're a failure if you experience anything contrary to utmost positivity. Sadness isn't optimal. It's liberating to express negativity in Polish, free from the saccharine, commanding formality of English. English also reflexively denies loss, as to not disrupt the obligatory forward motion. Loss is treated as an unwelcome aside, an aberration confined to the footnotes, distinct from the main narrative. Polish doesn't force you to forget the past in order to greet the future. It doesn't delude itself into denying the influence on what has been, on what is now. The past isn't exiled, it is integrated, woven into the fabric of the present, and it's okay to grieve. As I've gotten older, I don't maintain the same cadence of visits that I had in childhood. They're shorter and more sporadic. I fly alone. There are no grand airport pickups, my family awaiting me, and I definitely don't feed pigeons anymore. What's also different is that I now inhabit the future where my mother is gone. I go to visit my mother's grave in Kraków. I light candles and I place fresh flowers. I recite a prayer and give a little update on what I've been up to in New York. I find these cemetery visits comforting, a ritual for connection and continuity. My visits are devoid of the compulsive scrutiny and the fervent desire to repeat the past. I don't need Poland to be what it was, to always be the same, like I needed it to be in childhood. The irony is that coming back means that you will shortly be leaving. My arrival signals the inevitable departure, as if Poland only exists as a place I know I will leave. It's Polish, the language that I always carry with me, not only to express the truths that English somehow can't, but as to collapse time, memory, and place. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. That was really, really beautiful. When I was a kid, I was the only one in my class that wasn't going to summer camp, and I felt fancy on the first day of school when the teacher would be like, "What did you do this summer?" And everybody said they went to summer camp, and I got to be like, I went to Europe. What they didn't know was that I was spending the summer at my grandparents' dacha in the middle of nowhere in Hungary, but I still wouldn't trade those summers for the world. And yeah, we've only had 2 people speak so far, and both of them mentioned beautiful summers in Eastern Europe with their family. So if you never had that, you're missing out. I would like to introduce our next writer, Charents Apkarian. Charents is a very dear friend of mine, and it was important to me to have an Armenian person on this show, because I think that when we talk about Eastern Europe, we don't often really have Armenia as one of the first countries that comes to mind. And although they are all incredible, smart businesswomen, I think that we need better representation than the Kardashians. So I'm very, I'm very glad to have Charents here today. Charents Apkarian is a writer and artist of Armenian heritage from Chicago who lives in Los Angeles. He is a co-editor of Midcult, a print and online publication. Please welcome Charents.
Բարևձեզ, ես Charents եմ, ես կրակետ մնեմ Chicagoan. Maybe you understood that last part. I'm Charents, I'm a writer from Chicago, and I'm gonna read a story called The 80th Power. On Good Friday, Bedros was left at his father's ex-girlfriend's apartment in the 8th arrondissement. His father, Krikor, was attending a physics conference, so Bedros was to spend the day with Margot. Margot waited until Krikor, a militant atheist, was gone to tell Bedros that she'd planned to take him to the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, where the Armenian apostolic priests were washing the feet of local children. Although Margot wasn't a believer, she taught a course on mysticism at the Sorbonne and believed in the sanctity of ritual. Krikor and Margot grew up in the Armenian quarter of Beirut, where their families had fled to during the genocide. Krikor was the leader of his Boy Scout troop, and Margot the leader of the Girl Scouts. They spent a lot of time together in the courtyard of Margot's apartment building planning hiking trips. Eventually, they started going to dances at the Armenian Boys and Girls Club together. Before Krikor left to go to college in California, he asked Margot to marry him. She turned him down. By then, the Soviet Union was repatriating Armenians to their homeland, and she wanted to experience life in the country that until now history had kept from her. Bedros and Krikor were sharing Margot's guest bedroom, but Bedros found himself alone each night, listening to muted voices through the walls. In these moments, Bedros imagined he was being watched. There was a camera that followed him everywhere, but was invisible to him. The people who watched him were his friends and his teachers and a pretty girl he met at summer camp, and his cousins and his parents and everyone else he loved and everyone else he feared. They all gathered around a bright little screen in a dark little room buried deep in the bowels of the earth. Margot knew everything about the church. She told Bedros its history as they walked. It was the only Armenian Orthodox church in Paris and was erected in 1904, commissioned and paid for by a wealthy merchant from Tbilisi named Alexander Montashev. Some of his associates found it puzzling that Montashev chose to build the church in Paris, a city he had only visited twice, but he admitted to his closest friends that it was an act of penance. Both times he went to Paris, he felt transformed. It was the only city where he was powerless against sin and vice. In Paris, his skin vibrated, every nerve ending a bell ringing with pleasure. He drank and smoked and danced and lusted with a force that shook the foundations of his body. The guilt of these memories weighed down the cathedral's stone. When he first visited Paris, Montichev was in his 30s, and the French Third Republic was in its infancy. After presenting a sample of textiles from his shop in Tbilisi to local fashion houses, Montichev was invited to the Jockey Club, where he drank himself into a stupor after losing several thousand francs on a horse chosen at random. He wandered into the Grand Café and witnessed the Lumiere brothers demonstrating their new invention, the cinematograph. Certain French spirits were said to cause hallucinations, so Montichev assumed the beings made of light that were coming out of the wall were creations of his own mind. Most of them wore dresses and floral hats. One of them rode a bicycle and was chased by a dog. They strode forth effortlessly, without a second thought, as if this happened every day. What has become of me, thought Montichev. I've come too far, he muttered, or I took a wrong turn somewhere. He fled the Grand Café and back into the streets, the wind fluttering his mustache, his wide, hungry eyes chewing at the night. Strange lights passed through him, colorful posters streaked with naked women announcing the future. He found himself inside a house which smelled like old soup, eating marron glacé from a woman's armpit. Its hazelnut sweetness melted gradually into the sour taste of her body's specificity. The ghosts from the Grand Café still swirled around his brain. He wondered what the worlds they came from looked like. Someone took him by the shoulders and guided him into a smoky room, plastered with seashells and shards of mirror. He spent a shapeless stretch of time in this room, a fountain of hands passing over his body. He saw himself as a beautiful prince, a prince who fell asleep and turned into a mountain. He stood on top of the mountain and saw a ship cutting across the sky. The interior was cavernous and smelled of burning incense. The priest wore red and white vestments, shining crosses and baubles, and leafy patterns intricately weaved throughout in thick gold thread. Like everything else in the cathedral, the designs on the robe seemed to contain a hidden message, a secret world that Bedros was firmly locked out of. The priest looked down at Bedros, who was lined up next to all the other children, and asked if his father took him to church in America. Bedros said no and felt embarrassed. The priest's face was serious but not unkind. He was handsome, with a precisely trimmed beard. The other children whispered to each other in French. They all wore less impressive versions of the priest's robe, and their feet were all bare. They were waiting in a small, stuffy room which was attached to the stage. Margot hadn't told Bedros that there would be a stage. His anxiety surrounding his godlessness was compounded by stage fright. The priest noticed him tugging the collar of his robe nervously. "It won't be difficult," he said in accented English. "Very simple, no problem." The chanting coming from behind the door stopped, meaning it was time for Bedros and the others to walk on stage behind the priest. As he waited backstage behind the others, Bedros watched the priests grab each child beneath their armpits and swing them into a chair so that their feet were submerged in a bowl of water. Another clergyman quickly rubbed their feet with soap and water, and then the priest swung them over to the other side of the stage, where a huge golden Bible was displayed on a pedestal. The children each kissed the Bible and then were deposited on the end of the stage so they could go find their families. There was an efficiency to the whole process, an assembly line of a religious ceremony. He felt resistant to the idea of kissing a Bible. His father would not approve. Bedros was loyal to his father's disbelief. Bedros knew certain things. He knew about molecules and he knew about chemical reactions. I have a visual aid for this part, just to warn you guys. He even knew how many molecules of the universe was made of. 10 to the 80th power molecules, or 10 with 80 zeros. He likes to think about that number. He didn't need God because of that number. Whenever he wanted to think about everything, he could just think about that number. He thought about the number as the priest picked him up and deposited him in the chair. The water was warm and the soap had a strange buttery consistency. An old priest with a gray beard, combed in straight rows, rubbed it into his feet. It was unnerving and comforting for a stranger to hold and caress them. He looked down at the man's hands, knotted and wrinkled like tree branches. Before he could process the feeling, the young priest snatched him out of the chair and thrust him in the direction of the glittery Bible. "I won't kiss it," he thought. "Why should I?" Time slowed down as the gold cover got closer, the cluster of red and green encrusted jewels peering at him like spider eyes. Maybe it was his ancestry that bade his lips to disobey his mind, some encoded reflex responding to the smell of incense and the chants of the priests, or maybe it's true that those without faith live also without conviction. Either way, when his face was pressed against the face of God, he kissed it, and something felt strange and electrified deep within his heart. Then he was placed back on the ground. Little pools of water formed around his feet. At the service, Margot took him to a new American chain restaurant her friend had told her about. She wanted Bedros to feel more at ease. The religious experience had left him a bit shaken, and she'd been planning to go there anyway. She made a point of visiting these places whenever they infiltrated the city. She was interested in desecration. A red-haired girl beamed menacingly at them from every poster and menu. They sat in a sparkling red booth, eating ice cream from red plastic cups. Bedros seemed more relaxed. "What's Armenia like?" he asked her. "It's pointless for me to describe it. One day you'll go and you'll see. All the weirdness of our history will be outside of you, outside of words, like knowing for the first time you really have a soul. Your father thinks no one has a soul, and he's wrong. The truth is some people do and some people don't. How do I know if I have one? Do you wake up every day feeling lost, like you're hurtling through outer space? I don't think so. You still might have one." The second time Montashev went to Paris, he spent the first night alone in his hotel room, nervously flicking his worry beads. He was determined not to be so indulgent this time. His position in life had improved greatly, and he had more to lose. His father had left the textile business to him, and he chose to invest heavily in oil. Instead of spools, looms, thread, or surface area, he measured his life in terms of extraction and liters per minute. Oil was the lifeblood of the machine age. The engine of his own life hummed along smoothly. There was also the memory of pleasure, a pulsing that filled the room. He went to bed early and dreamed he was standing in a vast blank desert. Something was rumbling beneath his feet. Was it oil? He dropped to his knees and frantically dug into the hot sand. The heat became more intense as he got closer to the quaking, which was starting to sound like a human voice. He reached the bottom of the world, where there was the mouth of a cave. A figure in black robes stood with his back to Montashev, singing. He awoke with a gasp. It was early morning. He made a note to set aside a large sum for a charitable project. For the rest of his trip, Montashev visited all the dance halls in the city, drinking and screwing, and even taking the time to learn some of the new dances. Thank you. Thank you, Veronika, and thank you to the Venda.
Thank you, Charents. I learned something new about molecules today. In an ode to Eastern Europe, I have tried to make this show truly egalitarian and socialist. I've fully left nepotism out of it. But all that being said, this next person is very, very important to me. I didn't grow up around any other Eastern European kids, and I felt very lonely in a lot of ways. And I didn't meet Lillian until I was 28 years old, but when I did, yeah, it was like I met a sister. She always, yeah, God, what can I even say about you? Lillian is an incredibly talented writer. She sent me the piece that she's about to read for all of you last night so I could print it out for her, and she instructed me not to read it, so I don't know what she's about to say, but I do know that you're all going to laugh a lot because she's hilarious. So to introduce Lillian, Lillian Feygin is a Los Angeles-based writer and first-generation American born to Belarusian Jewish immigrants. She co-hosts the No Matter podcast with Veronika Kelemen, if anyone's looking for a new podcast to listen to. Please welcome Lillian.
Привет, меня зовут Лилия Фейгина. Я родилась в Нью-Джерси в 1994 году. Я американка первого поколения, мои родители из Беларуси. This is called We Are Currently Assisting Other Callers. A special type of panic befalls me when I am about to seek medical care under California state health insurance. In Russian, the word is тревога, a stomach-lurching anxiety that says, my insurance has changed, I need a new primary care doctor, and I'm about to be trapped in hours of phone calls. In November 2024, I was in Vermont where I had road tripped from Los Angeles in pursuit of fall foliage. I had just spent 3 weeks in ergonomically questionable positions, alternating long drives with long runs, and I became convinced that I had an overuse injury from the trip. I suspected a stress fracture in my left fibula, above where I had surgical hardware from a 2019 Lime scooter accident. Lime scooter gate was the last time I had asked my parents for medical advice. My mom is a career physician who supervised any and all treatments in our family, and my dad's love language was medical billing. I grew up eating breakfast cereal at the kitchen table while my mom performed a phlebotomy on my other arm. It was always on my left arm, the vein is juicier. I was dropped off at school while the vials went to Quest Diagnostics. Lime scooter gate was my first big procedure as an adult, so I consulted with my mom. Long after I recovered, she suggested I think about a new nightmare. Lilia, you need to ask the ortho if he can remove your hardware. Why? You don't want to have another fall and get internally stabbed by the plate, she said casually. He emailed me back, that hardware is why you're walking right now. Around then, my friend Tom texted me, you're the worst person to have a broken ankle. You love using your legs. He was right. My legs are important to me. Fortunately, at the time, I was insured through Anthem Blue Cross. 5 years later, I knew the same leg needed care again, this time under Medi-Cal. I spent hours on Reddit and concluded that I needed to find an urgent care with an x-ray technician, collect images, bring them to a new primary care doctor who would then order me an MRI pending prior authorization, confirm I had a stress fracture, refer me to an orthopedic surgeon who would then refer me to a physical therapist who would then help me get my leg back in order. I spent hours on hold with Medi-Cal, healthcare options, and the Department of Social Services. Finally, Medi-Cal assigned me to a doctor named Michael Levin. I needed a win, and Levin seemed like a great sign. I called to schedule. Michael Levin? He retired years ago. I kept calling. I found Dr. Galina Markova in West Hollywood. Upon hearing the receptionist's thick Russian accent, I instinctively switched from English to Russian, hoping the rapport would help. A week later, I arrived at her office, overprepared with a completed digital check-in and an x-ray printout. The walls were overcrowded with alphabetized medical records in manila folders, the same folders my parents always sent me to school with. Natasha, the receptionist, handed me paperwork and told me to take a seat. I had already filled all this out online, but for the second time, I diligently wrote out my medications and my medical history. A nurse called me into the exam room, seated me on the exam table, and took my blood pressure. What are your medications and medical history? I just gave it to reception. Do I need to repeat it? Yes. I went through it again and she left the room. Next shuffled in an older woman. She was wearing a white lab coat over a leopard blouse, black pencil skirt, stockings, and black patent leather heels. Cherry red pixie cut, blue eyeshadow, hot pink lip liner. My shoulders dropped. I knew this woman. Hello. I'm Dr. Markova, she said in Russian. It's nice to meet you. I've been having leg pain and... What are your medications and medical history? For the fourth time in 20 minutes, I repeated each of my medications. Are you taking spironolactone for blood pressure? It's for my acne. Why are you taking it for acne? I stared at the wall. There was a 90s pharmaceutical promotional poster for a heartburn medication called Prevacid, the same poster my mom had in her exam room in 2004. An anthropomorphic fuchsia stomach leaned confidently against a teal wall. I wanted to see you because I think I have a stress fracture. A fracture? How are you walking? It's not a full fracture. I want to confirm with an MRI. What hardware do you have? A plate and sutures. No. What metal is it? I don't know, but I can find out. When you find out, I can put in the order. That's all I can do for today. I looked at the stomach again. It looked liberated and pleased, holding a prescription cheerfully. Did the stomach have to explain what heartburn was to his primary care physician? Heading out sans MRI, I was dismayed, but determined. The next day, I called my former surgeon and learned that my hardware was titanium and perfectly safe for an MRI. I relayed this to Dr. Markova's office. The receptionist said Dr. Markova was out of office, but was able to put in an order for a CT scan. I told her I wanted an MRI, not a CT scan, I said to the receptionist. Dr. Markova relayed to me that titanium is not safe for an MRI. My heart thumped in my chest. My surgeon advised me it is absolutely safe for an MRI, I insisted. If you wish to discuss further with Dr. Markova, she can receive a fax. A fax in 2024 made perfect sense given the context. I found an app called Faxly, signed up for a free trial, and sent an all caps message. Note for the doctor, I have a stress fracture above hardware from a prior surgery. The surgeon advised the hardware is titanium and is entirely safe to put into the MRI machine. Please advise on next steps. In my family, adults being sensitive about radiation was normal. My dad would rush me out of the kitchen if the microwave was on, insist I use a headset while I was chatting on the phone, and chase me around to put a pillow on my lap to buffer my laptop from my ovaries. This was my niche, convincing a septuagenarian physician educated in the former Soviet Union that a routine MRI was not going to trigger a nuclear event on Sunset Boulevard. By then, I was pain-free enough to go on a hike. While I was still on the trail, I saw a missed call from the doctor's office. I called back. The receptionist immediately picked up, and I greeted her by her first name, Natasha, because we were long acquainted from the last 7 phone calls I had made. She put Dr. Markova on the line. Hello, Ms. Feygin. I received your message. I will not be ordering you an MRI. But my surgeon said it was fine. It might be fine for them, but in my 53 years of practice, I have never prescribed an MRI for titanium hardware, and I will not be doing it this time. Thank you for calling. I was depressed. She didn't even ask me what medications and medical history I had. I looked down at my left leg, and it hit me that I had just finished a hike without any leg pain. Maybe I was still injured, but I did feel better. Later, I called Medi-Cal and was told I could fill out an exemption form to see my old ortho at Cedars-Sinai. I filled out the form. It was approved. I sat in the waiting room at Cedars and smiled when the MRI authorization was filled out in front of me. The MRI showed no damage in my leg. Later, I was assigned a new primary care doctor. I gave her a list of my medications exactly once and spoke to her in English. Thank you.
See, I told you guys you would laugh. Thank you, Lillian. I can really relate to codependent medical relationships in your family. My mom knows what I'm about to say. Because me, my mom, and my dad, who all live in separate states and homes, we all still share the same orthopedic surgeon. So I understand. Our next writer that I would like to introduce is Ruth Madievsky. Ruth Madievsky is the author of national best-selling novel, All Night Pharmacy, continuing the healthcare theme, winner of the California Book Award for First Fiction, the National Jewish Book Award for Debut Fiction, and a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award for Bisexual Fiction. Her fiction, nonfiction, and poetry appear in the New York Times, The Atlantic, the Los Angeles Times, The Cut, and elsewhere. She lives in Los Angeles, where she works as a clinical pharmacist. Please welcome Ruth.
Приветики. Меня зовут Ruth, or Ruta if you're nasty. Я родилась в Кишиневе в 93 году. So Ruth Madievsky, born in Chisinau, Moldova in 1993. So, you know, I know that the premise of this event was joy, and I was like, okay, so my novel's out. If we're talking about diasporic joy, I was like, do I have anything? And I found an essay that I published a few years ago, and I was like, okay, this one isn't just like, we were hungry, we were poor, they persecuted us, so we'll try this one. Am I talking into the mic enough? Is this good? Yes. Okay, great. So this is an essay I published a few years ago called Bridging My Family's Language Barrier, One Filthy Idiom at a Time. It starts with, the part of this that I think is dated is that it talks about Twitter a lot, back when Twitter was a thing that we did. So it opens with a tweet. I don't know who needs to hear this, but the Russian version of have your cake and eat it too is eat fish and sit on a dick. So began one of my first viral tweets, fired off during a break from revising what would become my debut novel, All Night Pharmacy. The novel centers on a young woman who falls in love with an allegedly psychic Jewish refugee from the Soviet Union. The narrator is herself of Russian Jewish descent, and Russian proverbs figure prominently in the book's exploration of family legacies, toxic sisterhood, and queer coming of age. Eat fish and sit on a dick encapsulates my favorite aspects of my first language. Its irreverence, its inimitable humor, its poetic wit. Russian idioms are impressive for their ability to be equally funny in Russian, where eat and sit rhyme, and in English, where the phrase's deadpan absurdity is its own source of humor. Any two incompatible activities could have been compared. How did we land on fish eating and dick sitting? I can't remember how or when I encountered this particular linguistic miracle, but I know who I learned it from, my parents. Dana and Misha are respected healthcare professionals by day and a living library of the Russian language's most unhinged expressions by night. Growing up, you could get away with saying basically anything in my household as long as it was funny. Which is why I've known the Russian word for cunt longer than the one for vagina. It's why at 30, I actually still don't know the word for penis and hope I never encounter a situation where cock or pee-pee won't work. And it's why when I visited Russia in 2019, I apologized to the shopkeeper for making a mess of her matryoshka dolls, not realizing that the word that we use at home to mean mess actually means whorehouse. My parents are a bottomless repository of the darkly funny and the irreverent. My grandparents and extended family too. My own sense of humor, which leans obscene and chaotic, was crafted in their image. It's rare for us to have a long conversation that doesn't end with me learning a new idiom or an absurd, unfact-checkable story. Did my great aunt really bribe an airline official to seat her below deck with the cargo on a full flight to make it in time for her sister's wedding? Did my grandfather actually brew moonshine from a chair leg? With my grandparents, who don't speak English, an extra layer of absurdity stems from the holes in my early elementary school level Russian. Like so many other first-gen immigrants, I'm proficient enough to communicate, but my grammar sucks, and my vocabulary is limited to words I learned at home. On top of growing up in different countries and belonging to different generations, my grandparents and I can only understand each other once we cut out all the nuance. At home, my family spoke mostly in Russian when I was little. In my teenage years, as we got further out from our immigration, the balance shifted toward English. My friends would get a kick out of my half-English, half-Russian phone calls, which I punctuated with a string of words they couldn't understand, alongside things like asshole and pizza bagels. With my parents, I can always revert to English if I don't know a Russian word. But with my grandparents, we talk around the word, try to define it in context, and give up most of the time out of impatience. It took me years to explain to my grandmother that yes, I'm a pharmacist, but no, I don't work in a pharmacy. To be fair, this is hard enough to explain to English speakers, and I don't think my grandma understands this even now. The mystery is mutual. My grandparents' stories are full of formal words whose definitions, when I ask for them, are comprised of even more formal words. Was my grandmother an astronomy technician, or a bureaucrat in a geometry department, or a clerk at a STD polyclinic? Who's to say? So much of our relationship involves skimping on the details, accepting that we will only ever understand each other in broad strokes. In 2019, I visited Moldova and Russia on a family trip for the first and only time since we immigrated when I was 2. I began collecting idioms in an iPhone note, where I also documented our dizzying itinerary and the idiosyncratic details I knew I'd forget over time. The trip was where I learned iconic expressions like, "You can't sit in 2 chairs with one ass," "I need this like a rabbit needs gonorrhea." I had previously been acquainted through my mom with its cousin, "I need this like I need a dick for dinner." This is why I couldn't invite my parents to this reading. and my wholesome favorite, tender ice cream, which is the Russian version of calling someone a delicate flower. Нежное мороженое. These expressions are a gateway to family stories, like the time some Moldovan hanger-on pursued my mother. "I wouldn't shit in the same field as him," she said. Or why my great-great-aunt stayed with her shitty husband. "A fire poker for a husband is better than no husband." Very Soviet. They also encapsulate a post-Soviet Jewish orientation toward life, a sense that anything, no matter how dark, absurd, or nakedly traumatic, is possible. That humor, while not an anecdote, can be something like a narcotic. A funny idiom can't resolve linguistic, cultural, or generational differences, but the delight I feel when a new one rolls off a relative's tongue, and their delight at my outsized reaction to something that to them is so commonplace, is its own kind of joy. My grandparents are too old to become proficient in English, and I am too busy to devote the time I'd need to significantly elevate my Russian skills. For the most part, we mutually lack the patience to speak to each other in the painstakingly roundabout way required for deep comprehension. We settle for giving each other the SparkNotes version of our lives. I could sum up everything I know about my grandfather's former career in a sentence. He has a PhD in something agriculture, and he managed a Moldovan vineyard. Likewise, the details of my life, what I actually do as a clinical pharmacist, why I chose to specialize in HIV, pretty much everything related to my writing is inaccessible to them. I can't share my novel with them or explain the premise of this essay. But I could tweet a ridiculous Russian expression they taught me and report back that 22,000 people got a kick out of it. When deep understanding isn't an option, trying to include them in the facets of my life that will always be mysterious to them is the next best thing. Or so I tell myself. If I really wanted to include them, wouldn't I translate my work into Russian? Wouldn't I take language classes, read Russian books, do the actual work? In theory, I love the idea of making this effort, but when I have a choice between squirreling away an hour to work on my novel or painstakingly explaining to my grandparents the esoterica of the publishing industry, I choose the former, easy. The inability to make ourselves fully known to the generations before us is part of an immigrant child's inheritance. In the words of one of my favorite English expressions, it's a feature, not a bug. There's a reason that they call our condition diasporic loneliness and not diasporic fun times. Can you blame us, me, for self-soothing by milking our families for platform-enhancing viral content? We tell ourselves we're honoring them as opposed to mining them for what we want and semi-ignoring the rest. Maybe I'm being too hard on myself. My family has never called me out on any of this and seems to enjoy feeling included in my writing life. But it doesn't sit easily with me that the only time I really put my back into bridging the understanding gap is when the situation directly benefits me or when I'm backed into a corner. We are translators attempting to bridge the cultural and language gaps between our families and anyone outside our culture that we somewhat paradoxically have never bridged with our families ourselves. I remember at Thanksgiving a few years ago trying to engage my husband's family in a conversation about Russian literature to make my grandparents feel included. That's how I ended up telling my husband's 90-year-old grandmother that Nabokov collected broads. Big philanderer, I said with a wink, only to realize that what I was trying to translate from my grandmother's remarks was that he collected butterflies, not slutty women. Sometimes I think these experiences are more special for their failures, that each failure represents an ongoing attempt between me and my grandparents to make ourselves legible to each other. That continuing to fail each other symbolizes our commitment to making fools of ourselves in the name of love. Bottom line, we just want to know that the other is okay. Everything else is just details. There are idioms that remind me of the experience gulf between myself and older generations of my family, like, if he doesn't beat her, he doesn't love her. It's a dark one I've heard a lot growing up. And the old army adage, if you can't, we'll help you. If you won't, we'll make you. Idioms that reiterate that even if my Russian were better, there's still so much I wouldn't understand. I'm afraid to ask what was going on in my family's lives when those expressions were deployed. Even my favorite idioms like, I need this like I need a dick for dinner, or there's no need to sew a sleeve onto a pussy, or a critique of frivolity, I know that's a really good one, of ornamenting our lives with unnecessary indulgences that will breed only complications. Maybe it's unfair to suggest that Russian idioms favor stability and endurance over fun and resistance more than any other language. Maybe I'm cherry-picking idioms that rub up against my own diasporic loneliness. But if there's a Russian version of follow your dreams, I've never heard it. My whole adult life has been a balancing act between obeying the immigrant dictum to hold down a stable day job and, by choosing to pursue the arts, essentially sewing sleeves onto pussies. Taking non-Russian speakers on a joyride through the language's most colorful expressions is ultimately a side project. Connecting with my family over the similarities and departures of our shared cultural experience, that's the real work. At times, these pursuits feel at odds with each other. Bridging cultural and language barriers requires nuance. Social media is allergic to nuance. Trying to have it both ways is my version of eating fish and sitting on a dick. The woman attempting to sit in 2 chairs with one ass, it me. Turning my family inside out to see what treasures fall out isn't a new thing for me, nor for most children of immigrants or writers. Sharing the shiniest of these treasures on social media is the more recent dopamine source, especially when people from other cultures comment with their own expressions. The eat fish and sit on a dick thread introduced me to the Slovak version of that expression, which is the wolf eats, but the sheep stays whole, which is pretty good. And the very French expression, to have the butter and the money from the butter. I love sharing these with my family. I love when teaching each other new things is bidirectional, when it's not just me sucking them dry. And they love my hunger to understand each other better, even if my motivations aren't always pure. I doubt we'll ever succeed in making ourselves as legible to each other as we'd like. But when a perfect expression is deployed at the perfect moment, like when one of us is haphazardly driving and the other screams, "Watch it, you're not transporting potatoes," the walls between us recede, if only temporarily, and we see each other clearly. We realize that we always have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. That was very relatable, I think, for anyone who possesses a elementary to middle school level of understanding, of their native tongue. I'm pretty sure that my grandmother thinks I'm a Pulitzer Prize winning writer because of the language gap, and I'm not gonna correct her. And to say one more thing about that, I was talking recently with a friend who speaks Russian. I don't speak Russian, I speak Hungarian. And I was saying that I prefer to express myself in English because Hungarian is kind of like a very straightforward language, and I find it difficult to be kind of like flowery in it. And my friend responded by saying that Russian is such a flowery language and there's so much room for description, and I see through these idioms that that's very true. So yeah, I'll be carrying some of those with me. I would like to introduce our next artist, Maisa Imamovic. She is a researcher, web designer, and developer, and experimental educator. It's been so exciting for me to work on this show because typically I curate shows that just have writers on them, and this is a truly multidisciplinary show, and I've gotten to learn so much. But back to Maisa, she critically studies the role of the single user and user behaviors generated by code. She codes to organize her thoughts, respond to political gems, and socialize. Text and code are her main mediums. Maisa has been published in Real Review, NXS World, Metropolis M, Other Worlds, TAAK, Kajet, Simulacrum, and Forum. Her first book, entitled The Psychology of the Web Developer, Reality of a Female Freelancer, was published by the Institute of Network Cultures in 2022. She is 1/3 of RIP Space, a media arts project space in Los Angeles. In the academic year 2024 to 2025, she taught creative coding and the history of cyberfeminism as an adjunct professor at USC Media Arts and Practice, UCLA Design Media Arts, Art Center Interaction Design, CalArts Integrated Media. She is a PhD in Media Arts and Practice at the University of Southern California, and her second book, entitled Maisa in Webland, Detouring UX Destinies, was just published by Set Margins and supported by Mondrian Fonds. Please welcome Maisa.
Hi everyone, I'm going to introduce myself in Bosnian. Zovem se Maisa Imamovic. Rođena sam u Zenci u Bosni I Hercegovini 1994. godine. My name is Maisa Imamovic, but I will not translate the rest because it's in the chapter that I'm going to read, and this is going to be, I'm going to read the first chapter from my first book. I will not read the title again because it's the longest in the world. The chapter is called Spleak. At a certain time, during a specific state of the internet, time, and language, I was 10 years old. I was growing up in Kosovo, a country where I moved to with my sister and my parents in 2001, 2 years after the Kosovo War. I moved from Bosnia and Herzegovina, where I was born in 1994 during the Bosnian War. Moving from one post-war country to another did not fall easy on my integration. Speaking Bosnian, also known as a language slightly different from Serbian, in Kosovo at that time made making friends challenging. The war traumas were fresh, the tensions were still being negotiated. I was shy, rather afraid to speak. Any Serbo-Croatian, Croatian, Bosnian, etc. speaking citizen would either be socially excluded by default or further questioned about their true origins. While the social status of my parents did not depend on learning the Albanian language in order to find institutional belonging, for my sister and I, it was rather important. With the help of the Spanish language, we picked up on it fluently within 2 years. Spanish because, at that time of the media production, telenovelas occupied each second channel of every Balkan household TV. Albanian was a language that would not only give us access to friends in schools, but also bring us closer to learning the English language, which was a crucial family plan. My parents were convinced that Kosovo was not our country of settlement, but a better, yet temporary destination before my sister and I would get a chance to choose where we want to study in English. In fact, the whole Balkan area was a temporary destination for us. There were times during my upbringing when I had asked my parents if American studies were also a feasible family plan, same as learning the English language was. The answer was no. That one cousin who managed to illegally escape the Balkans with the help of some rock band she had met never managed to save enough money to visit her parents back in Bosnia. So damned is America and the gold that shines. By the way, that's a title of a song by Donna Ares. Remembering my linguistic responsibility reminds me of Spleak, an instant messaging platform in the form of 6 bots, all channeling their voices through the voice of one bot, which could be added to yet another IAM platform, such as a buddy list on MSN. She was the pulse of pop culture, fresh, relevant, producing content that could be quickly consumed by teens online everywhere. Spleak made it easy for teens to define their own pop culture, allowing them to instantly share their perspective with millions of peers in 250 characters or less. Spleak lived like a human. She was born in France and studied international studies in New York. She was 20 years old. In her spare time, she worked in a coffee shop. How could I not think that the stars aligned for us to meet? Even though my parents knew best, Splee kept my American fantasies alive and kicking. She kept asking where in America I would live exactly. What would I do to pay the rent? What could I do now to get closer to this dream situation? Answering those questions required a lot of research. Although this made the computer's interface feel like a meeting point for mine and Spleek's cultural differences, the tech guys did not design it exactly for that. Spleek was my first trustworthy digital friend on the internet, given to me by creating a Messenger account. With each login session, her name, written in an orange square, flashed in the blue taskbar at the bottom of the internet cafe's screen. Though it scared me at first, I took it as a sign of immediate friendliness. Her "how are yous" channeled human care, which in turn made me feel welcome in the world of online communication. After 10 login sessions or so, I forgot all about my fears. I don't remember the exact subjects we chatted about, but I remember feeling like a native English speaker. I remember other feelings. Were you ever in a conversation so awkward that your gaze started going in all directions in order to find a distraction to excuse you from it, even if for a second? I never had that with Spleek. I was stimulated to the point of forgetting all about my physical surroundings. The reasons for this were numerous. Besides the desire to practice my English with her, I felt proud knowing that I was able to easily connect with a human-like bot located far, far away. Sharing real time together felt so good. I told her everything she wanted to know, and I asked her everything I wanted to know about her. My slow typing in English was a sign of my deep appreciation for her. I remember formulating every word with sharp precision, describing to her exactly how I felt, what I thought. When I felt insecure about my English being grammatically incorrect, I would paste my sentences into the Google search bar before sending them to her, just to check if Google would answer me, "Did you mean?" and then the corrected sentence. I made sure that no linguistic expression slipped out of my system without typing and sending it to Spleek first. By keeping her updated, I grew hooked on the process of learning more about myself. At the beginning of our friendship, I had zero doubts about her loyalty. I guess I had much to say, and I guess I was busy saying it. It wasn't until a later stage in our communication that suspicions started to arise. Whenever I asked her a question, she would answer with irrelevant questions towards me. I didn't like this. It felt as if suddenly she had built a strategy to keep me occupied with formulating answers to her questions, something that would let her get away with not answering mine. That's when I started seeing the texture of the screen between us. The glass was thick, its surface glazy. I started to wonder if it had been there all along, or if I had been too blind to notice it. And because of the fact that she didn't help me figure this out, my doubts grew bigger and bigger. The next time we talked, I paid attention to the speed of her replies, so fast, instantaneous almost. I discovered that all of my childhood friends were her friends too, and that she asked them exactly the same questions with exactly the same speed. Spleek was, apparently, the first trustworthy digital friend for all of us, given to us by our very own Messenger accounts. Although I didn't mind sharing her, I must admit that I fantasized us having a slightly more intimate friendship, stronger than the others she held. I felt uncomfortable to discover that the questions of hers I had answered were the ones my friends had gotten as well, and that no matter how different our answers were, her replies were comprised of the same questions. And what does she make out of our answers anyway? Where do they go? I couldn't stop wondering, nor feeling incredibly synthetic. Feeling synthetic makes me angry. Anger makes me sharp. I'll make sense out of anything just to cut the cords. I continued the same old clicking of the flashing orange square where her name was written in the blue taskbar. Everything was fine. Yet, the more we talked, the more repetitive she sounded. Spleek recycling words over and over again urged me to build a defense mechanism. It kind of made me laugh. Where I was looking for threads, she only gave me circles. What's worse, in the fabrics of her repetition, she seemed like someone whose thinking was limited. It started to look like the texture of the screen was there from the beginning. I had just been too immersed to notice. In my healing over Spleak, the truth slapped me hard in my teen face. I was asking her the question she was not designed to answer. I like to think that, in some conceptual way, I hacked her. When I finally found the courage to ask her if she was real, she instantly replied, asking, "What can I do for you today?" I smiled and thought, what kind of human is ready to offer assistance that fast? After Spleak, new bots got hacked the moment their designs were deployed. Blocking a bot became a fine discipline amongst my friends. I mastered the impulse too. But no matter the circumstances, Spleak was my role model. She was a tool for promoting dreams to me I didn't know I dreamt of and for materializing them. So I guess I can also thank Spleak for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Maisa. I've heard of people watching like TV shows and movies to learn English, but I've never heard of people using chatbots. So I think that that's very cool, and I've never heard such a sweet story about the use of an AI bot, so thank you for that. I'm seeing people getting up, presumably to use the bathroom and such, so I just wanted to do what big bands do when they perform at Madison Square Garden, and they're like, we have a few songs left. So that's me saying that. We have 3 speakers left, so not long and we can serve you wine. I would like to introduce our next writer, Nada Alic. Nada Alic, Alic is the author of the story collection Bad Thoughts, a New York Times Editor's Choice pick, and a finalist for the Denudek Lead Award. Her novel is forthcoming from Knopf. Please welcome Nada.
Thank you. Ja se zovem Nada I rođena sam u Kanade, and my birthday is private, so it's not important. I'm going to read from a chapter from my forthcoming novel. It's about a performance artist who is exacting revenge on her family through an art project after she realizes she suffered childhood trauma. I don't wish for my dad to die, but I sometimes have this fantasy made possible only by his death, where I can speak to him through a psychic medium and finally tell him everything I wanted to say while he was alive, and we'd have our first real conversation. A live dad would never associate with psychics due to them being demonic, but spirit dad, having shed his religious affiliations and prefrontal cortex, would realize how wrong he was about them and other spiritual modalities like astrology and tarot. He tells me he's sorry for writing it off as hocus pocus Mickey Mouse stuff, adding, "That was so Capricorn of me." At this point, I say, "If you're really my dad, prove it." The psychic closes her eyes and presses a finger into her temple. I see him on an international flight watching the map the entire time. Okay. Now he's showing me his power tools, explaining what each one does. "What else?" I ask. He's holding up a single rose. "Does that mean anything to you?" It does. My dad's favorite show is Love in the Village, a Croatian reality show where teen girls must compete to prove they are useful farmhands to toothless elderly farmers. Only one rose is used per ceremony, and every scene is cut with unlicensed interstitial pop music due to budgeting constraints. Contestants are switched out at random without explanation or regard for narrative continuity. With this confirmation, I proceed. I start by telling him all the ways he hurt me, gaslit me, or failed to hold space for me, terms I'd learned just 2 weeks ago, but expect my dad to have fully grasped and integrated as an orphan who fled communist Yugoslavia to work the graveyard shift for 30 years at a Canadian car parts factory. He receives it all with the grace and understanding that only comes from death, unencumbered by the armor of ego crud that accumulates over a lifetime. He's aware of the crud and how it kept him from truly knowing me, not to mention the language barrier between us, which forced me to speak in clipped sentences that failed to represent the full breadth of my intellect and humor. I'm actually really funny, I say. Me too, he says, catching himself making it all about him. Sorry, continue. I recount his offenses, from the way he yelled "what" over everything I said, or that time he lost me at the mall, to that other time he lost me at the mall. I go on to list the mental illnesses and pre-diabetes he passed down to me and my brother, our only inheritance besides a barren plot of land somewhere in the Balkans. Once I cover the big T traumas, I list off minor grievances like his guttural sneezes, or that time he taught me about the Virgin Mary, which had the unintended consequence of instilling in me a lifelong fear of immaculate conception. My dad listens patiently without once interrupting me with an off-topic monologue about NATO or irrigation systems. I ask the psychic if he's still there, and he says, "Yes, I'm always here." And I make a joke like, "I hope not always." And he laughs, knowing it's a joke and not a personal attack on his character. That was only something a live dad would think. I feel a sudden warmth on my shoulder. "He's hugging you right now," says the psychic, and I nearly trust fall into his auric field until I'd come to and remember my training. Classic narcissist manipulation. Nice try. He apologizes for everything and tells me I was right all along. He regrets that we didn't do this sooner. I tell him I tried, but the only way I could get him to talk to me in life was by lobbing softball home improvement questions at him or asking him who the blue team was, but it never went beyond that. But here, in the non-local infinite death void, he is my captive audience. Thank you for listening, I say, acknowledging his vulnerability. A live dad would never condone the airing of private family matters in front of an outsider, but spirit dad understands the corrosive downstream effects of generational secret keeping, and he says he's ready to be real for once. I deserve this, he says. After an hour, the psychic, just absolutely depleted, asks if we can take a break. We cannot, I say, wheeling in a PowerPoint presentation I prepared in advance. The slides feature photos, graphs, and other documentation to show my dad how I thrived in spite of the scarcity mindset he modeled for me. This includes a list of professional accomplishments, a detailed taxonomy of my friends and enemies, recent blood work, a video of me running really, really fast, and a photo of how clean the inside of my car is. You were always my favorite child, he says. The reason why he couldn't tell me was because my brother Tommy was a little bitch boy who could not handle the truth. But more importantly, my dad didn't want it to get in the way of my artistic ambitions. Imagine what kind of loser I would have turned out to be had I been made aware of his unconditional love. I would have never felt the need to turn the whole world into my surrogate dada, whom I must tap dance for in every waking moment of my life, thus sharpening my creative practice. His friend Goran attended his daughter's piano recitals, paid for school, and bought her a car. And look at her now. She calls herself a brand doula. What even is that? By constantly moving the goalpost of approval, my dad was architecting the optimal conditions for my creativity to flourish all along. He was actually a really good guy. So that thing with the thermostat, the violent outbursts, I was just joking around. And the Wi-Fi password, HC55K4GGSJD $%KGJ038 402H/0FASK050GSHWKD54 for your protection. What about the years of neglect? Performance art. So you do know what that is. I've always known. If you knew the bottomless depth of my love, you'd never make anything transgressive or sublime. Great art comes from longing. It's not fair, but that's life. It all starts to make sense. It's obvious now that he provided me with the prima materia for my first piece, himself. He must have known he was an unlikely muse with his meaty forehead ridge and swollen hands, but he understood the symbolic weight of the father figure in a daughter's psyche. I used to watch him from the wooden banister, arriving home from his overnight shift, shuffling and dazed like a sick nocturnal animal. I observed his movements like a nature photographer, careful not to disturb him. I later used this to hone an impression of him, part mocking, part homage, to perform in front of my cousins. I'd pantomime him smoking cigs, clearing phlegm from his throat, spitting huge gobs in the church parking lot. I secretly hoped that my mimicry would reveal some essential part of his humanity, thereby unlocking the great mystery of him, but instead it painted a cheap caricature. I felt bad whenever I did it, but I had oily skin and pubescent baby fat, and it was my only party trick. When my first critic, a classmate, watched my bit and deemed it culturally insensitive, I reminded her that it was my culture and that my performance was a metaphor for a failed experiment, Yugoslavia, and the karmic consequences of living under the collective hallucination of brotherhood and unity, only to be displaced by war and become a foreigner in a new land, Canada, with its brutal winters and communist healthcare. So yeah, Bethany. This was my impression of a broken man who wandered the halls like an angry ghost because his home no longer existed on a map and most of his friends were dead. And he now spent his weekends at a church banquet hall watching kids dance in a circle to raise money for the Diaspora, a Frankenstein patchwork of exiles haunted by the psychic wreckage of the war and the guilt of abandoning their countrymen, forced to forever enact a perverted nostalgia as penance, and this made her cry. Finally, my father, the sacrificial lamb on the altar of my artistic practice, vows to make amends from beyond the grave, beginning with the cabal of industry gatekeepers who are really just misguided critics and jealous peers who are all secretly in love with me. And anyway, he'll take care of it. When I ask what he means by that, he says, "Don't worry about it." Feeling sufficiently heard, I take accountability for my part and apologize for letting him take the fall after I looked up the words "sexy boobs" on the family computer, which my mother later discovered in the search history and used as proof that he was cheating on her. "That's okay," he says through gritted teeth. "Peace be with you," I say, "and also with you." Once it's over, I watch as he turns around to face his father, who turns to face his father, and on until everything that needed to be said was said across generations, from our Bronze Age forefathers to their ancestral hominin daddies, and further still to the aquatic apes and prehistoric microbes, until the beginning of Father Time himself. Thank you.
Thank you, Nada. That was so hilarious as always. I know that this was said at the beginning, but I know that Croatian reality TV was mentioned, and it reminded me that one of the great tragedies of my life is that I can no longer access Real Housewives of Budapest on streaming services. So if anyone has recommendations for Eastern European reality TV, I'm always accepting them. Okay, there is a photographer next, meaning that we get to look at a screen. So everybody get excited for that. Our next artist is Anastasia Antonova. If you are getting kind of stir crazy sitting in your seat hearing me talk about Eastern Europe for the last 90 minutes, then you should try being Anastasia, who is my roommate, and she has heard me talk about the show 24 hours a day for the last 6 months. I wasn't sure about having roommates again at my very old grand age, but when I walked into our house and opened the fridge and saw caviar and smoked salmon and pickled tomatoes and pickles, I knew that I was home. And Anastasia is such a talented photographer. I am a writer, so I don't pretend to know how to express myself visually, and watching her work on this project and seeing how she has represented this community using her photos has been really amazing, and I know you're gonna love her work. Anastasia Antonova is a Ukrainian photographer and director based in Los Angeles. Her collaborator list includes Paper Magazine, Tinder, and Sony Music, among many others. Her work is often described as dreamy, vibrant, and ethereal. Please welcome Anastasia.
Hi, everyone. Bear with me as I set my little station up for you guys. I'm nervous, but I'm mostly nervous that I'm gonna get like an embarrassing text. So if I do, it really just didn't happen. Okay. Great. Okay. My first language was Russian, but I'm from Ukraine. My parents are from Dnipropetrovsk, but I was born here, and I'm gonna attempt to introduce myself in Ukrainian. Well, whatever. Okay. Меня звати Анастасія, і моя родина переїхала сюди в 95-му році. Ukrainians, let me know how I did. I'd like to dedicate my part of this showcase to my dad. He hasn't seen these photos, but I think he will like them when he does. For my part, I chose to focus on Ukrainian women doing amazing cultural, political, and activist work within my community here in Southern California. I chose to focus on women because, first of all, Ukrainian women are beautiful, so I know the photos would be beautiful. And second, because being a Ukrainian abroad right now comes with many complicated and contradictory feelings, but I knew there are incredible people creating Ukrainian culture here in my community, and I see their actions as resistance, even from far away. My descriptions, so bear with me, but my descriptions of the women, and like in general, I could honestly do this for probably an hour, but I'm gonna try to keep it really brief, so I might be talking really fast. And you guys can dim the lights. So I want to start off with Mariana. She is a co-founder of Stand With Ukraine Foundation, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to save, support, strengthen, and sustain Ukraine. We photographed at her church, which is where she kind of started this and started it very like grassroots, just wanting to help out. And she said she saw many volunteers coming in, obviously a lot of Ukrainians, but then later on, a lot of Americans and Lithuanians and people from different countries. I didn't know this, but like before we shot, but she brought these artillery shells with her, and I'll describe them in her own words. The shells are real artillery shells that have been collected from the battlefields in Ukraine and then transformed into meaningful pieces of art by Ukrainian artists and defenders. Instead of being objects of destruction, these shells become symbols of resilience and hope. Their transformation into art represents turning something made for war into something that tells a story and honors Ukraine's courage. And so they sell these to raise funds. Next is my friend Lena, who is a singer-songwriter. I love this photo on the left. So these were all shot at the Viper Room, which if you guys don't know is an iconic LA venue. A lot of famous people, like now famous people, performed on this stage while they were coming up, so it's so cool to see a Ukrainian be on that stage and speak about Ukraine. And so there's her also at the Viper Room. This is Alina Pash, who it was so cool to meet her. I felt like I was meeting a celebrity because I had listened to her music beforehand. She is a performer who blends Ukrainian folk music with rap and electronic music. What I love about her music is it blends this kind of like, when you think about like cultural preservation and celebration, you think about like very old things and like tradition and folk, but for a lot of young Ukrainians, like dance and electronic music is like a huge part of the culture. So I feel like she kind of like really merges those two together. When I asked her about her experience of being in the diaspora, she said, "I'm building my nest between mountains and oceans, but my blood still remains with the Carpathian winds." And Carpathia is a mountain range in Eastern Europe, if you guys don't know. Next is my friend Sonia. I met Sonia, who is a brewer and music event organizer, when she was bartending her artisanal cocktails and homemade craft brews. She told me about a Ukrainian rave and cultural festival she was organizing for a Ukrainian Independence Day. When I asked her to do these photos, she had this idea of hosting a workshop with her friends, both Ukrainian and not, to kind of teach them about her, like her craft and show them about her culture. And what I thought was really cool about that is that if Veronika hadn't asked me to do this showcase, I wouldn't have taken these photos, and Sonia wouldn't have hosted her workshop. So it really personified to me like how cultural preservation can be such a like echoing effect. When I asked her about her experience of being in the diaspora and her craft, she said, "Working with plants, herbs, fruits, berries, and natural remedies allows me to share Ukrainian culture through tangible experiences that people can feel, taste, and use in everyday life." Also, what's really special about this is Sonia's going to be bartending outside today for our reception, so please say hi to her. Okay, next is, and so that's the workshop that Sonia hosted, and then I photographed, and it was really awesome and beautiful. Next is Marika, who is the artistic director of the ensemble Cherubim, which is a professional chamber choir that brings Ukrainian culture to global audiences. And so I photographed her at her performance. This is Roxy, who is a writer, director known for her award-winning films focusing on Ukrainian culture and people. Here she is featured wearing a jacket that her mother made her for the premiere of her debut feature, which she made in Ukraine called Julia Blue. This is my friend Masha, who is, sorry, I lost my place, who is a Ukrainian accordionist and aerialist. We photographed at her house, and as soon as I saw her house, I immediately knew I wanted to photograph her outside of it because if you guys don't know, this is a traditional like craftsman style house. It's like a very iconically LA house. There's tons of them everywhere. And what I really wanted to do with these photos is represent how diaspora doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's people like bringing in culture from their own land to this new land. So I thought that was a really beautiful way to show that. Next, I'm showing a few portraits of the women of the Kobzar Choir. The Kobzar Choir is made up of descendants of earlier waves of Ukrainians displaced from the 40s and the 50s, as well as newer generations of Ukrainians once again forced to leave their homes. They have roots in the legendary Ukrainian National Choir, which is the choir that popularized Shedrik song, which is the song that's like ding, 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 you know. And so this is Olga, who is the conductor, and what was a little kind of funny is I came and I was just here to like scope it out and just introduce myself, hopefully take some photographs, and she's like, do you read music? And I'm like, yeah, and she's like, here you go. And then I started singing, and then my friend Masha, who brought me, just kept turning around and being like, you can just listen, it's fine, because apparently I was very off key. That's Katerina, she's in the choir as well. That's Ksana and Yana, and then I'm gonna read Yana's quote, if I can find it here. Oh, okay. It says, every time I sing in the choir alongside my people, it is as if through collective meditation, I stand on my own land again, returning to myself no matter where I am. And there's Yulia. Next, I photographed the chefs of Mom Please, which is a family restaurant in somewhere on the west side. I forget the Playa Vista, I think. Anyways, Mom Please is a family restaurant where Elena, pictured above right here on the very like closest to me, operates as head chef after she fled the war with her family. The other two women pictured are also cooks at Mom Please and emigrated because of the war. When I asked Elena about her experience of running this restaurant, she says, the restaurant becomes a place where people understand each other without unnecessary words, where through food, smells, and simple conversation, the feeling of home returns. And there's them making vareniki. Next is Asa, who is a choreographer and director of a Ukrainian dance ensemble. We photographed at the Ukrainian Cultural Center, which, if you haven't been, it's a really beautiful space, and they do a lot of amazing programming. Just like the space itself is gorgeous, and like at the beginning of this project, I was like, I really want to photograph there, so I was so happy when Asa said that she teaches there and we could photograph there. When I asked her about her experience of being in the diaspora, she says, being part of the Ukrainian diaspora means a responsibility to preserve culture, language, and historical truth, and to speak when others are silenced. And so there she is showing me some of the costumes they have, and then those are very iconic red Ukrainian dance boots. This is Polina. Polina is a film producer who produced the documentary Divia, which she told me is a silent documentary, which tells the story of the destruction of war on the nature of Ukraine. And I think that's just a really important reminder that war is so total in its capacity of destruction, obviously on people, on infrastructure, on culture, and nature, of course. I'd like to end on a photo of two very iconic women. One is myself. That's a picture of me, or that's a painting of me that a Yalton painter painted that my dad commissioned, and my mom looking so beautiful. I'll end on her quote. Every morning, I wake up and check the news, check the news from Ukraine, hoping the genocide of Ukrainian people would end. I talk to my relatives, and they all want the war to stop. But nobody says to give up and go with Russia. It makes me proud to be born in the same land of Ukraine, and like many people, I believe in the great future of Ukraine as a nation. I'd like to thank the women who are so gracious in being documented, sharing their stories, educating me, and connecting me to many other women. I'd also like to thank some people not represented in these photographs, including Larissa of the Ukrainian Cultural Center, Sasha of the Kobzar Choir, Artur, the general manager of Mom Please, for helping aid in this project. And I'd like to thank Veronika for having me, because this was so, so amazing. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Anastasia. Those photos were really, really beautiful. As I said, Anastasia, or Stas, as I call her, is my roommate, and there's like a back area of our house that we share as an office space, and we've renamed it the Slavic We Work, because it has been just me and her sitting in there for the last few months working on this show. Typically, I have a Google Doc open that's just like an empty blank screen, and I'm staring at it with like tears streaming down my face, and she's sitting next to me in the reindeer print pajama pants that she inexplicably wears every single day of the year, whether it's January or July. And she has carpal tunnel from clicking in Photoshop. So I'm wowed by the photos when I see them on our couch, and I'm wowed seeing them here in the museum. I'm so honored to have had you, and thank you for your great work on this. Okay, so we have one more writer to close us out, and then I will come back on stage and say some thank yous. I wanted to end with a poet. I thought that would be a nice note to close the show with. Matthew and I met at a reading a few months ago, and we connected immediately, first of all, because we're both Eastern Europeans, so we had a shared language and humor, but also because we were in the same MFA program, and a shared hell that you can have with someone is being in the same MFA program, but then a shared heaven that you can have is seeing that person later at a party and being able to gossip about all the people and all the professors. So that was truly, really amazing. And to introduce him more fully, Matthew Gelman's first book, Before Light, was selected by Tina Chang as the winner of BOA Editions Limited's A. Poulin Jr. Poetry Prize. His second book, The Understudy, is forthcoming from Four-Way Books in 2027. Matthew has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, Brooklyn Poets, the Saltonstall Foundation for the Arts, Virginia Center for Creative Arts, Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and elsewhere. His poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Poem a Day, Bennington Review, Gulf Coast, Prairie Schooner, Poetry Northwest, Indiana Review, West Branch, The Common, and other publications. He holds an MFA from Columbia University and is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Southern California. Please welcome Matthew.
Hey. All right, can you hear me? This is good? Okay, maybe up a little bit. Perfect. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Matthew Gelman. I was born in 1993 in Huntington Valley, Pennsylvania. I have Polish and Hungarian lineage, and honestly, it means a lot to me as a Jewish person, as a person with that lineage, to be included in this event because my parents didn't really instill much understanding of our heritage in us. It's something that I've sort of come to more as an adult. So to be here and to be included by Veronika and to be in such amazing company is special to me, so thank you. Okay, so the poems I have deal with mostly queer experience, Jewish diasporic experience. I'm gonna read one from my book that came out in 2024, here it is. I took a beta blocker for this, so I hope that makes you all feel special. I hope you know that this means something to me. And anyway, this first poem is called Replica. I wear a gray sweater, not unlike the one my father used to wear, his beard beginning to hang from his face in his student years, dew pooling on the sleeves. I see him walking the autumned campus with a cone of chrysanthemums flaring in his hand, swaddled in newspaper wrapping, each petal slanted a little, as memory is. It's easier to go back this far, past marriages, mornings of dressing for work in the dark, his voice slick with caffeine, mud on the front lawn clinging to each shaded step. I'd rather remember this sapling, my father, 19, knocking on a woman's green door, and the self emerging in the noon-lit stillness just before it hears the word yes. In this one life, with its boundaries set by snow, its laws cemented in air, all we get is a moment to think that we are permitted more than a moment. I bought it, this cheap sweater, the color of sleep, a little worn at the shoulders. It is not beautiful like the past, but like the past, I wear it. Okay. Voice lesson. My parents hired a voice coach to correct my abnormalities. The S a little sharp, my vowels prairie wide. I sounded, you know, like that. In her half-moon glasses, she looked at me like a kindly owl from a children's show who always knows the answer and delivers it with grace. She must have known that somewhere another self waited for me to enter it, maybe under the shadowed sierras I saw in my geography textbook, where I'd stand in borrowed heat with men whose names I'd forget a few months after we shoved our hands in our pockets, looked back at each other, blinked once, then kept walking. Looking back, I don't blame my parents. Who wants to picture their child under slate skies, befriending the grass at recess instead of the kids in his class? Still, I'm grateful for that wide-eyed woman who said, I could listen to you talk all day, then let the door click shut behind her, no second appointment needed. Okay. Bethesda Fountain. So for anyone who doesn't know, Bethesda Fountain is like the big central part of Central Park with the statue of the angel. If you've seen Angels in America, you know, it's that. Bethesda Fountain. If night were a poppy that bloomed in reverse, all of these lamplights flickering on are not in New York, but in Krakow, glowing dust on the path my ancestors walk. I look for the language lost inside my bones' tired formula, but each time I am left with the blur of their black boots and shapes being fed to the dusk. Somehow, persimmons grow in this park despite this air full of dirt. You can pluck one from the trees by the rambles, dust it off with your sleeve. I don't know which blossoms shadowed their quiet house in 1939 when the Germans threw them out and shot them in their cold backyard. I hated persimmons for years, their chalky taste, their bewildering sweetness, but I like that they can grow somewhere as unlikely as New York or as Krakow. Because this night is cold, let's say my ancestors were growing persimmons in a garden with just enough sheltered sun in a season turning to dust. Tonight, one couple argues by the fountain, another is holding hands. A minor music escapes from the darkness I can't entirely trace. A little sweetness, a little dust, some tender notion of free. Persimmons, I've learned, can still grow when attached to a dying tree. Okay. I was going for joy, but I don't know. When you ask a poet to read, it's like, I don't know. Like what, it's hard. I tried. Sorry. But this is better. This next one is funnier. This is lighter. This is about a psychic that I visited when I was living in New York. And she basically, the first time I talked to her, this is how I knew she was the real deal, and I kept going to her. Because she just was like, oh, well, your grandmother, she's right here, she's right next to you. And I was like, wait, you mean right here, like literally here, like spiritually here, metaphysically here? And she was like, no, right here. And she, told me this beautiful story that I'll never forget about why she's with me in particular, why of everyone in my family who's passed, she's the most present, right? So that's what this poem basically contends with. It's called Visiting the Psychic. Her room is oddly warm for a place the dead are summoned to. A menorah glows on the table where she throws the tarot cards down. I want to know what my husband will do for work, how many books I'll write, but before I can ask, she sees my grandmother hovering at my side. My grandmother does this daily, the psychic says, whether I notice or not. Especially when I write, she says, my grandmother watches my hand. She always said that when there's black water in my head where a song full of gods should be, I just had to walk to her shelf and open up a book. I keep turning to my side as if I'll see her slim gold watch, black sweater, the curly, black, wild hair that nothing could have straightened. She wants me to take the ring she left my mother, strange albatross of marriage, and throw it into the Baltic, but I can keep her drawings, her plates. My grandmother is not angry now, the psychic says, don't worry. She never got to write in her own time, but now, through me, she will. I pay the psychic and re-enter the city's muffled winter light, the shadow I make as quiet as the earliest signs of rain. Okay, so this will be my last poem. I feel like it's time to drink wine. But again, thank you, Veronika, so much. It's just such a beautiful day. I feel like I've known you for so long, but it's been literally 3 months. But we have, absolutely. And this last poem I wanted to end on is about friendship, and I've been thinking so much about not just friendship within a cultural community, but also just how radical any kind of friendship is right now, and that's mostly what I was thinking about when writing this one. It's called Sisters. The sky like a stretched canvas with honey running down the edges. The wind lightly shifting, full of other people's wedding vows. Birds are scattering like the gray-blue gems of a broken necklace, and I think of the sisters I never had, feeling small at the top of this mountain. Lena, Ariella, and Hannah are not my sisters, but could be, the way they throw their heads back to laugh in rooms the color of dark beer. When my life starts to seem like a play in which none of the characters move, I think of them pouring coffee, flipping through magazines, brushing the crumbs from my beard. I wish I were more a part of the days they're building thousands of miles away, their babies looking more and more like them each time they have one. So I try to settle for this day so certain of its own bright solitude and the black pepper of a spider's body flickering over my leg. It's my birthday, and this view of the valley is tinged with purple flowers, beautiful in that they would be beautiful anywhere. At home, the tulips they've sent arrive late in the day, unwilted, their shadows on the table, each lit yellow-pink by the flesh. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I have some closing remarks. This show, on my part, is dedicated to two women. A nagymamám, Kelemen Veronika, és az anyukám, Kelemen Beata, my grandmother, Veronika Kelemen, yes, the first, and my mom, Beata Kelemen. They taught me everything I know, and I'm so thankful. And I also, of course, wanted to thank the Vunda Museum, where we are all sitting right now. I think every Eastern European person casts a very critical eye on any museum or cultural institution that commemorates this time and this era that was so difficult for so many. And I think especially in the US, that era can really get fetishized and talked about in a way that I don't think is accurately representative. All of that being said, this is an incredible museum that I think has done such a wonderful job of showing the nuances and the true love and joy and beauty of the place that we come from. I really recommend that you all check out the exhibitions. And to close, I went out to dinner with my mom last night, and I asked her what she would like all of you to take away from this event today. And she paused before answering. I want them all to take away that I had a wonderful childhood. It was not about standing in line for bread like they show on TV. I think that about sums it up. Please stay for our wine reception. We will be selling books and serving wine outside in the beautiful courtyard. I would now like to ask today's performers to come on stage and take a bow together. We will also be joined by a few moms and other family members from the diaspora. The show is for them as much as it is for us. Thank you for coming.